All right, listen up, because what went down on First Take this morning is going to completely change how you view the Lakers' bench situation. And I'm not talking about some speculative, maybe this works out type of analysis. This is legitimate roster construction meeting strategic player development. And when Stephen A. Smith started connecting all the dots about Nick Smith Jr. and what he could mean for this Lakers team, I literally had to rewind, because the implications are so much bigger than just adding another two-way player. This could be the move that solves the Lakers' most glaring weakness without costing them a single asset in trade. So I'm watching First Take right as they're going through their Lakers coverage, and suddenly the entire conversation shifts from the obvious stars to this deep dive into bench scoring. And you could feel the energy in that studio change, because this has been the issue haunting LA all season long. Last year, the Lakers were dead last in the entire league in bench scoring. Dead last! Think about that for a second. You've got LeBron James and Luka Doncic in their primes. You're the 3 seed in the brutal Western Conference, and your bench is giving you absolutely nothing offensively. That's not sustainable for championship basketball. Stephen A. was going off about the perfect world scenario where you've got Rui Hachimura and Austin Reeves coming off the bench, managing that second unit and providing instant offense when the stars sit. And honestly, he's absolutely right that this would be the most balanced version of the Lakers roster. You'd have Luka and LeBron starting, and then ideally you're surrounding them with Marcus Smart and Jared Vanderbilt for that defensive intensity. Because here's what most people don't understand about Luka's game. He loves to get going early. The first 5 minutes of every game, Luka is taking half his field goal attempts, setting the tone, trying to build that early lead. But here's where the strategic thinking gets really sophisticated, and this is where the First Take panel showed they actually understand modern basketball. Max Kellerman made this brilliant point about how when Luka drops 20 or 25 in the first quarter, but you're only up 7 points, that's a defensive problem, not an offensive one. If you've got Smart and Vanderbilt in that starting unit, creating defensive stops and generating transition opportunities, suddenly that 25-point Luka quarter turns into a 15-point lead instead of 7. And on the nights when Luka starts slow, your defense keeps you close enough that you can inject offense later. Because here's the reality that Stephen A. kept hammering home. It's way easier to inject offense than defense. You can bring scorers off the bench and get back into games, but if you're already down 20 because your defense couldn't stop anybody, no amount of bench scoring is going to save you. That's just mathematics. But if your starting unit keeps games close through defensive intensity, then guys like Rui, Jake LaRavia, and now potentially Nick Smith Jr. can come in and provide that offensive spark without the pressure of digging out of massive holes. The Rui Hachimura discussion became a fascinating subplot during the segment, and this is where you see the human psychology element that makes basketball so much more than X's and O's. The panel was talking about how Rui genuinely might check out mentally if he's not in the starting lineup, because we've seen him do it before. That's not criticism. That's just understanding who he is as a player and what motivates him. But the Lakers need him not to check out, because Rui alone, averaging 13 points per game off the bench, with his mid-range mastery and ability to get buckets in isolation situations, could solve most of their bench scoring problems. Then you add Jake LaRavia into the equation, and suddenly the math starts working. The First Take crew was projecting that if LaRavia can find his zone and give you 12-13 points per game, and Rui is giving you his 13, that's already 25-26 points right there from just 2 guys. Add in what Gabe Vincent provides, what Marcus Smart contributes, maybe some Dalton Connect minutes, and suddenly you're not looking at the worst bench in basketball anymore. You're looking at a functional, maybe even good second unit. But here's where Nick Smith Jr. enters the conversation, and everything gets exponentially more interesting. Stephen A. was breaking down Smith's numbers from last season with Charlotte. 9.9 points per game on somewhat inefficient shooting, but context is everything. Charlotte was terrible last season. They were devastated by injuries, and Smith was being asked to create everything for himself without quality playmakers around him. His rookie year, he shot 43% from three-point range. That's not a typo, 43%. Yeah, it was only on 2.1 attempts per game, but the stroke is clearly there. Last season, that percentage dropped to 34% on 5 attempts, but the volume increase with decreased efficiency tells you he was forcing things because nobody else could create offense. Now imagine Smith playing alongside Luka Doncic and LeBron James. The quality of his three-point looks is going to skyrocket because defenses cannot help off him when those guys have the ball. Max was making this projection that if Smith can get 4 or 5 attempts per game at 37 to 38% and bump his scoring average to 12-15 points per game, that completely transforms what the Lakers bench looks like. The timing element became crucial during this first take discussion, and this is where the strategic vision of the Lakers front office becomes apparent. They're not bringing Smith up to the main roster immediately. He's on a two-way deal, which means he'll play sporadically throughout the season, get G League reps, continue developing. But when the Lakers inevitably make their mid-season trade, whether it's for Andrew Wiggins or another 3-and-D wing or a backup center, they're going to need to bring someone up to fill roster spots. That's when Smith becomes incredibly valuable. Stephen A. was painting this scenario that was absolutely compelling. Lakers make the Andrew Wiggins trade. It's a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 swap that opens up roster spot, and suddenly you can promote Nick Smith Jr. to the main roster and slot him into that sixth-man role. Now you've got him and Rui as your primary bench scorers. Maybe LaRavia is giving you 12-13 as well, and suddenly you're at 35 to 40 points per game from your bench without even counting what Jackson Hayes, Jared Vanderbilt, or Dalton Knecht might provide. The Dalton Knecht subplot became another fascinating layer to this discussion, and Max made this observation that I think is absolutely going to come true. Knecht is probably getting traded at some point this season. Even if he's great offensively, even if he's cooking and putting up numbers, unless he improves dramatically on defense, the Lakers are going to look at him as a trade chip whose value they've successfully raised. Max was saying the Lakers will package him to incentivize another team to make a deal, essentially using his offensive production as leverage to get defensive pieces they actually need. But here's where it gets really interesting from a roster construction standpoint. If Knecht does get traded, who replaces that bench scoring? Nick Smith Jr. The panel was speculating about this bench unit where you've got Smith at the 1, maybe LaRavia at the 3, Rui at the 4, and Jackson Hayes at the 5. That's multiple guys who can score, shoot, create for themselves and others. You're not so front-heavy anymore where everything lives and dies with the starter, because that's the Lakers' biggest vulnerability right now, and Stephen A. wouldn't let this point go. They're going to have one of the best offenses in basketball, regardless because of LeBron and Luka, but they're incredibly top-heavy. On nights when the starters have an off night, and everybody has bad nights, even superstars, you look to the bench and see Jared Vanderbilt, Marcus Smart, Jackson Hayes, maybe Bronny James, and there just aren't enough scoring options. Right now, it's basically Dalton Knecht and Jake LaRavia, and you're hoping those guys can consistently produce. The Lou Williams comparison was perfect, and this is where the panel showed they really understand different player archetypes. Nick Smith Jr. in that Lou Williams instant offense role, coming off the bench and just getting buckets without needing plays called for him, operating in that pure scorer mentality. That's incredibly valuable, especially for a team that needs to manage LeBron's minutes and keep him fresh for the playoff. The defensive concerns got addressed honestly during the segment, and nobody was pretending Smith is some lockdown defender. He's undersized at 6'2", which creates some matchup problem. But as Max pointed out, he's got the athleticism, he's got good wingspan, and he can at least be a pest defensively if he buys in. You're not asking him to guard the other team's best player. You've got Smart and Vanderbilt and OG for that. You're asking him to hold his own for 15 to 20 minutes per game while providing scoring punch that the Lakers desperately need. Here's the bottom line that the First Take panel kept coming back to. The Lakers were the 3 seed last year with the absolute worst bench in basketball. If they can improve from worst to even just bottom 10, that could be the difference between being the 3 seed again versus the 2 seed, or maybe even the 1 seed. Every marginal improvement in bench production compounds over 82 games and then magnifies in the playoffs when rotations tighten and you need every available scoring option. That's what went down on First Take this morning, and honestly, the Nick Smith Jr. signing might end up being one of the most underrated moves of the entire offseason. This is the kind of low-risk, high-reward player development that separates championship organizations from teams that just talk about competing. The Lakers just might have solved their bench scoring crisis without giving up a single asset. And that's the kind of front office brilliance that wins championships.